We might not gotten to see a ton of them at OTAs, but Bryan Bresee and Isaiah Foskey could be the Saints' most impactful rookies in 2023. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, you could subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can continue the conversation with me one-on-one over at joinSubtext.com/Locked On Saints. And as always, I am your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site, covering the New Orleans Saints. And of course, you can find me every single Tuesday over in the Locked On NFL podcast, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some, on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to get into our breakout candidates for 2023 on the offensive and defensive side. I promise you it won't be the only time that we discuss this, but as we're rolling on here, let me know who your top breakout candidates are going into the season, and maybe we'll revisit that topic a little bit later, but we're going to discuss that a little bit today. We're also going to go behind the scenes a little bit on some of the OTA absences. That was something we kind of listed off yesterday, but haven't gotten the opportunity to really discuss. So I'll highlight why some of those absences you shouldn't be concerned about and why others are maybe a little bit more concerning. But first, who will be the most impactful rookie for the New Orleans Saints draft class in 2023? We're going to start that off on today's episode. Of course, it is evening, so we are here live with you. Appreciate everybody for being here. Chris, Pammy, DJ, Scott, Black Tool, David, Dylan. I see all y'all. Thank y'all very much for being here and more. And welcome Lyle to his first ever new Locked On Saints live stream. Appreciate you very much for being here. And of course, if you're listening live or you're catching the show later, much love to you. Appreciate all the support. So let's start off with, somebody already hit me with the Was Smoke Monday here. Oh boy, triggered. All right, so I want to take a look at the most impactful rookie for the New Orleans Saints in this year's draft class. And look, there's going to be a lot of kind of easy ways to look at this that are going to be very comfortable, like looking at, the top selection, Bryan Bresee, or maybe even the top premier position selection being Isaiah Foskey. But there are a couple of other folks that we should be talking about in that conversation as well. Before we get to that, though, what I want to highlight is that these two players, Bryan Bresee and Isaiah Foskey, kind of come in where the Saints have maybe their biggest positional needs when it comes to the draft class, right? The defensive line was a spot where there was a mass exodus over the course of the offseason. And even though you didn't really lose any defensive ends formally that, that piled on a bunch of sacks in 2022 or anything like that. Remember, they lost Marcus Davenport, but he only had a half sack last year. So when you look at where he kind of left, you're not too completely disappointed in losing a half sack. Now, he, of course, as we all know, he did more than just that. He was, a benefit to the team in terms of the run game, things like that. But he had a lot of trouble staying healthy, staying on the field, all of that. But you did lose, if you're the New Orleans Saints, Kendre Ellis last year. Kendre Ellis had 7 sacks last season. So you still lost a little bit of your pass rush off the perimeter, even though it wasn't necessarily at the edge rusher position. So you end up kind of hoping to fill that gap a little bit with a guy like Isaiah Foskey. So Isaiah Foskey is somebody that comes in, even though he's a second round selection, and he's technically, a selection that comes in behind the first round guy and all that stuff. He could still be one of those guys that has a massive impact for the Saints in 2023, especially playing such a premier position. Remember, when I say premier positions, what I'm discussing there are the players that touch the ball the most or the ones that impact the players that touch the ball the most. So guys on the offensive side like quarterback, wide receiver, tackle, the guy that protects the edge when it comes to when it comes to, protecting the quarterback. On the opposite side of the line of scrimmage, it's the guy that's coming after the quarterback, the edge rusher, and then it's the cornerbacks on the outside that are trying to keep the wide receivers from catching the ball. So it's about who affects the ball the most. And so Isaiah Foskey immediately lines up into one of those positions, but he will be a part of a rotation. Let's keep it real. Guys like Carl Granderson, Peyton Turner, Tano Passanio, they're also going to see snaps at the position opposite Cam Jordan, but maybe Isaiah Foskey even rotates in for Cam Jordan on a couple of occasions. It's a little bit hard after just one OTA practice to really get a full glimpse at where it is that Isaiah Foskey is in the pecking order when it comes to the Saints defensive ends. It's a little bit tough to get a read on that when it comes to Bryan Bresee as well. For those that aren't super familiar, the way that OTA practices tend to work is that you see a lot more of the first team, you see a little bit more of the second team, and then you see a tiny bit of the third team. So for instance, when the Saints were doing their 7-on-7s yesterday, the first team unit, which was led by Derek Carr at quarterback, saw 8 different plays, 6 passes, 2 runs. The second unit during 7-on-7 saw 4 plays, all passes from Jameis Winston. But the third team only saw 2 plays. Same thing happens with teams. The first team saw 4 snaps, the second team saw 3 snaps, and then the third team also saw 3 snaps. So you see a little bit less of the third team, and that's kind of where Isaiah Foskey and Bryan Bresee were for their very first team practice for the New Orleans Saints. When you look at the primary backups, the second team, if you will, what you saw on the defensive line was Tano Passanio, Jabari Zuniga, Prince Emeli, and then Peyton Turner. The interesting note there is that Jabari Zuniga was playing on the interior, even though he's been a career edge rusher so far. So some of that has to do with availability, some of that has to do with numbers, all these other things, but it is something to keep in mind that like Isaiah Foskey and Bryan Bresee, we didn't get a whole bunch of looks at them over the course of OTA practices when it came to the stuff that you can really evaluate, like team drills. And even on those 7-on-7s, like I mentioned, those are 7-on-7, so the offensive line and defensive line ain't even on the field, ain't even out there. So we didn't get a huge glimpse at both of those players over the course of the first OTA practice. Now, things are going to change, and as they get settled in, as they learn more of the system, as the team gets more reps, they'll see more reps as well, and they'll slowly start to climb up that ladder into second team, into first team stuff. So what I don't want to do here is like overhype these players as if we saw some amazing things from them during OTAs. The truth is we didn't really get to see them much during OTAs in terms of those drills. You could see them do their individuals. You could see them getting work in with the coaches. They're clearly hungry for knowledge, and they're clearly still learning, and that is absolutely okay. But I think that when you look at which one of these guys could have the biggest impact in 2023, if your impact is read through stats, then it might be Isaiah Foskey. But if your impact is read through addressing the largest position of need this offseason outside of quarterback, then it could be Bryan Bresee. The two guys that you shouldn't factor out, though, especially because injuries and other availability questions could end up impacting their opportunities to jump to the forefront, near the forefront in their positions, are, of course, running back Kendre Miller out of TCU. If Alvin Kamara gets suspended, but he and Jamal Williams help to keep the team's run game afloat, that's a massive impact for you. Regardless of how many times he finds the end zone or anything like that, that's a massive impact. And then A.T. Perry, the wide receiver drafted in the 6th round out of Wake Forest. If Michael Thomas deals with any injuries or anything like that, then he could potentially become a solid go-to target, whether right off the bat or as the season continues to progress on. So those guys do also need a little bit of attention when we talk about the most impactful rookies. But if I'm a betting man, which I am a little bit, I kind of think that the mix of rotation on the defensive line and the mix of the ability to impact the game as an edge rusher kind of gives the, at least, let's call it, tentative edge to Isaiah Foskey, but I wouldn't rule out Bryan Bresee at this moment, and we cannot forget guys like Kendre Miller and A.T. Perry. But I'll put my money on Isaiah Foskey for right now. We'll see if I end up eating those words later. So the New Orleans Saints had attendance of about 79 or 80 of 89 players on their roster during OTAs. So who were the 10 players that missed? And what's a little bit of the things that we can glean from those misses? Should we be concerned? And are there places where we don't need to be concerned? There's certainly one of those that you don't need to be concerned about, and it's Demario Davis. And it's not just because he knows the system. It's about much more than that. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's live episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's as good as it gets over at FanDuel, whether you're wanting to bet on the NBA with the Eastern Conference Finals now going another game at least. You've got the NBA Finals on the way. You've got the NFL season right around the corner, MLB, whole bunch of stuff underway that you can go and check out over at FanDuel.com/locked on. If you head over to that website and you're a first-time user, you're going to be able to walk away with a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. It's $1,000 in bonus bets that comes back to you if your first bet doesn't win, meaning that for your first bet over at FanDuel, there is absolutely no way for you to lose. So go and check that out today, FanDuel.com/locked on. You can also download the app. It's safe, super easy to use, and secure. And of course, FanDuel gives you immediate payouts because you know you're finna win some money anyway, so you know you want to get it quickly. Check it out today, FanDuel.com/locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, family, continuing on with today's live episode of Locked On Saints. Let me see those locked. Let's do your team every day. Let me see your team every days in the chat. We got an active chat tonight here on the live show. Let's take a look now at a couple of other things. I'm seeing a couple of questions that I want to make sure that I address before we get to the absences over at OTAs. I want to be really clear. I'm seeing people ask about, like, was this player there today? Was that player there today? Media is only going to be at the first day of each week of OTAs. We're only there on Tuesdays. So any type of, thing that goes on Wednesday, Thursday happens completely like behind our eyes and hopefully, or beyond our eyes. Hopefully we get a little bit of that, inside information from some sources and things like that. And of course, I'll keep you up to date with all that. So when I look at the New Orleans Saints and their absences, should you be concerned? Should you not be concerned? Oh, we got a lot of your team every day in the chat. Appreciate y'all very much for coming through with the support there. So when we look at the absences for OTAs, for all you everydayers out there, we went through yesterday's episode discussing not only kind of what happened, but who were the players that weren't there. I could do a quick rundown list, but it's just going to be me listing off names. So let's make it a little bit more interesting than that. Who should you be concerned about that missed? Who should you not be concerned about that missed and wasn't present for OTAs? And I'm going to give you some why to it all as well. Appreciate you, as always, making us your first listen of the day. I want to start off with Demario Davis, New Orleans Saints linebacker. I think a lot of times what you're going to hear is, oh, well, Demario Davis doesn't need to be at OTAs. He's a veteran. He's one of these guys that, you could just plug him in and then he's going to be able to play and help you win games no matter what. Doesn't need to be at OTAs. That is true. But I want to point something out about Demario Davis. And this is not secret. You can go to the Saints Twitter page right now, at Saints on Twitter, scroll through just a little bit or head over to the media tab, and what do you see? Photos of Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, Chris Olave, and others working in the Saints indoor facility. So he's been present at the facility. It's not like he's off in Cancun somewhere with LeBron James and Anthony Davis celebrating another year without a ring. Anthony Davis is, at least. It's not like he's, blowing everybody off and not, paying attention or anything like that. Like, he's fully engaged. He just wasn't at the OTA practice during the media session on Tuesday. And that's something to really consider when it comes to when we report attendance at practices and OTAs. We're reporting the attendance that we see for the small amount of time that we get to watch practice. Now, we got to watch all of practice yesterday, but we don't get to see inside the film room, inside the position rooms, inside the classrooms, all of that stuff. So even though a player is reported to not be present during the practices, it doesn't mean that they're not at the facility at all. And Demario Davis is a perfect example of that. There's photo evidence of Demario Davis in the Saints indoor training facility from last week before OTA practices even began. So I wouldn't be worried about Demario Davis. Another couple of guys that I wouldn't be worried about that missed: Michael Thomas, Andrus Peat, Ryan Ramczyk. These are all three guys that have been managing health concerns over the course of their offseason in terms of recovery and stuff like that. So it's not surprising that they missed and therefore shouldn't be concerning. A different issue, though, is Nick Saldiveri, the Saints' fourth-round selection, the ODU offensive lineman, who got some early reps at right guard. We'll probably see some time at left guard as well throughout training camp and all that. They'll move him around on the offensive line, but he's got experience everywhere. And when you look at Nick Saldiveri, the reason why I say that there's a little bit of concern with him is because he missed for injury and he hasn't yet played a game of NFL football, right? So that means that he was either hurt as rookie mini camps, continued on after media was present, or he was hurt away from the facility, probably training and getting ready for OTAs. It was a calf injury, so not something that's super recurring like a groin injury or a knee injury or an ankle injury or something like that has like a really bad track record of re-aggravation and all this other stuff. But a calf injury can get there if you ask guys like Julio Jones, for instance, throughout his career. But if you take care of it, do the things you need to do, all that, then you're good. So that's what the Saints are doing. They're taking it easy with it. He is expected to be back for training camp, as are Andres Pete, Cesar Ruiz, who was present but not participating yesterday, as well as Michael Thomas, not present, at least from our eyes, but is somebody that is going to be back to being, is expected to be ready for training camp. Now, a couple of other guys, Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara, James Hurst, Marshawn Lattimore, JT Gray, all weren't present. JT Gray is a little surprising. Just got his first, just got a new contract with the team, all that. But look, you should also know that sometimes these guys miss things for family graduations and babies being born and all these other things that are kind of happening away from the public eye, like OTAs are. So that could be the case with some of these folks. Alvin Kamara, never expected to see him at OTAs. Still don't expect to see him at OTAs because he plays running back. He's a running back. And to me, if you're a running back, there's so much in terms of like cutting and sticking your foot in the ground, changing direction, all of these things that could potentially end your career if you do it the wrong way once, that you probably want to limit the amount of times you're doing those things. So I completely understand the lack of presence of guys like Alvin Kamara. I would put Taysom Hill in that category because so much of what he does is with the ball in his hand as a ball carrier, even if not as a running back, all that. And look, Marshawn Lattimore lacerated a kidney last season. I wouldn't be in a hurry to come back to a football field either, even though he finished out the season playing out on the field. So that's all that it is. I just look at those 10 players, and there's not a lot of concern in terms of their ability to translate the game to the next level and to the playing level. I think Nick Saldiveri is maybe the most concerning one just because you don't want that injury to become something that hampers his development over the course of OTAs and getting comfortable and familiar. But maybe he's still in the training room. Maybe he's still in the weight room. Maybe he's still in the classroom. So it's not like he's completely removed from everything that's going on with the New Orleans Saints. I see a quick question here about Lucas Kroll and if there's any update on him or if there's any info on him. I thought that he looked good yesterday. He ran a couple of really clean routes, got open in the seam. There was a pass that came his way from Jake Haener that had to be a little bit of a miscommunication, but I'm not sure if it was the wrong route being run or just the rookie quarterback not knowing exactly where that route was going to break or expecting it to be something different than it was, whatever it might be. But little things that'll all get cleaned up. Both these guys incredibly smart and quite good at football. So I think that those things will start to clean themselves up. But always fun to watch Lucas Kroll when he's out on the field. And I think very well he's your third tight end this season behind Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau. And if we know anything about the New Orleans Saints, the third tight end is absolutely getting playing time. So one way or another. Next, we'll go to some breakout candidates. Are there some breakout candidates on this New Orleans Saints roster? I've got one on offense and one on defense. And then I will also give you a little bit of an update on Will Lutz. Seen a lot of questions about it in the chat, so let's not leave that off the table. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. We are wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate all of y'all for coming through for this live show. Dylan, I'm going to answer your question because I was going to talk about it here anyway. Make sure you come through for tomorrow. We're taking a look at more stuff around Saints OTAs as well as all the biggest stories around. But I want to give you an update on Subtext. This has been a lot of fun. I've been able to give some early updates and things like that and be able to reach out, kind of chop it up with some people. And we're having a lot of fun with it. So I want to remind you, if you're interested, join subtext.com/lockedon. Free trial for 14 days, $4.99 after that. If you choose to stick around, do the free trial first so that you get to feel it out. So if you want to be a part of that, you can check that out. Join subtext.com/lockedon Saints. Okay, enough marketing. Let me talk football. Or let me make sure you hear about some football. Breakout candidates for 2023. Come on, bruh. Coming through for his first live. Appreciate you being here. On the offensive side of the ball, my breakout candidate in 2023 is Rashid Shaheed, the New Orleans Saints wide receiver. And of course, Dylan, and you might say, Well, Ross, he already kind of broke out. I mean, the kid touched the ball, 2 times, and scored 2 touchdowns to open up his career. That's a pretty fast, pretty phenomenal way to open up your career. Absolutely. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. But I think that there's a bigger role for him. Look, I've watched Rashid Shaheed grow as a route runner and as a wide receiver every week throughout practice last year, as well as now just through OTAs and in being able to see him out there. And so I think Rashid Shaheed is absolutely a breakout candidate for the New Orleans Saints. And I think that he's one of these guys that will have a good 2023 season. And he doesn't have to be a 1,000-yard receiver. To be honest with you, he doesn't have to be a 900-yard receiver, an 800-yard receiver. You get 750 yards out of Rashid Shaheed, you're in a great spot in terms of what it is that you want to get from your, probably your third wide receiver if Michael Thomas stays healthy, your second wide receiver otherwise. That's a really tough, not tough, but that's a really good place to be, but it's a tough spot to come from in order to find an opportunity to develop and to contribute and all that. He had 488 yards receiving last year, average 40.7 yards per game. If he does that over the course of 17 games in 2023, that's 691 yards. Let's call it 692 if we round up. You get that out of Rashid Shaheed, you are balling over on the offensive side, because you imagine a 1,000-yard receiving season from Chris Olave. Hopefully you can get a 1,000-yard receiving season from Michael Thomas, but even if you get 800, 900 yards, that's fantastic. You get 80, 90 catches from him, you're winning games. That's huge. And then you look at where the Saints can find their additional production from guys like Foster Moreau and Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara in the passing game. The run game, of course, is available to you. Juwan Johnson, who looked outstanding during the first practice of OTAs. There are so many different ways for this New Orleans Saints offense to attack that if you're getting that kind of production from your third wide receiver, you're in a really good place, because it means you're winning elsewhere too. And a part of your ability to be able to throw the ball to a guy like Rashid Shaheed comes from the threat of other wide receivers on the field. And then he becomes a threat, which then benefits the other wide receivers on the field. So I hope that makes sense. But the way that I kind of look at this is that you have a real opportunity here, if you're Rashid Shaheed, to just build off of the success that you had last season. You don't have to do anything different. You can come in and average exactly what you averaged last year. You can come in and continue to contribute in ways outside of just your pass catching. You could run those jet sweeps, those reverses. You can line up in the backfield and be utilized there. He's got that number 22 now to help him blend in the backfield, all that. There's a whole bunch of different ways for them to be able to use Rashid Shaheed. And I think that also puts him in that breakout category. And if you think about Malik Flowers, the undrafted free agent out of Montana, if he makes the roster as the primary returner, it frees up Rashid Shaheed even more, taking fewer hits, having fewer touches in the special teams game, all of that. Let's jump over to the defensive side. I'm really interested in your thoughts on who the Saints' defensive breakout potential player is. I kind of bounced around on this one a little bit. I didn't allow myself to pick Alontae Taylor because I thought he had such a strong rookie season. But if you think about just having a better second year than or having a better next year than your last year, and that strictly being the sort of definition of breakout, then Alontae Taylor should absolutely be on that list, and he might be at the top of that list in that case. I thought about including Malcolm Roach because he's going to have, you imagine, a little bit more of a bolstered role in this New Orleans Saints defense than what we've seen in the past. But I'll tell you who I think would be the best case scenario for the Saints to have a breakout season in 2023, and it's Peyton Turner. Now, I know Peyton Turner played 5 games, played 8 games in his first 2 seasons, in each of his first 2 seasons, respectively, and so he hasn't gotten a lot of opportunity in the NFL. But when he's been out on the field, he's absolutely somebody that has shown you what he can do. He's shown you that he has something to contribute. And so this would be best case scenario. It's not necessarily my selection. I'll tell you my selection in a little bit on the defensive side, but this kind of would be best case scenario for the New Orleans Saints because that's a first round selection that you have invested in Peyton Turner. And if you're getting great production and a breakout season out of Peyton Turner and you get solid contributions from Carl Granderson and Isaiah Foskey, then it's kind of like the conversation we just had around Rashid Shaheed, that you become so much a threat that other people start to benefit around you. They start to benefit, you start to benefit because of the threat that the other players continue to provide. So the best case scenario for the Saints is for Peyton Turner to be the breakout guy in 2023. And I'm not going to rule that out because, look, Trey Hendrickson didn't have the best first 3 seasons of his career, and then all of a sudden he popped off for 13.5. So we've seen it happen in the system before. And forgive me if you disagree here, but I think Peyton Turner has better tools than Trey Hendrickson had. I mean, Trey Hendrickson came in with short arms and all the things that say that you shouldn't excel as a defensive lineman. And what has he done? He's found ways to excel as a defensive lineman. So I do think that there's absolutely a way, for Peyton Turner to be the breakout candidate guy. But I'll tell you, my selection, which shouldn't surprise anybody, is Carl Granderson. I mean, again, the guy in the way that he finished 2022, ripping those starts away from Marcus Davenport, started the last 3 games, came up with 3 sacks over the last 4 games of the season. If you take that and you take the average of that and then you extrapolate it over the course of 17 games, you're looking at about 13 sacks in 2023, and that is awesome. And I think Carl Granderson, somebody said it in the chat, it's 777 Apparel. Carl Granderson's hungry. And the Saints clearly believe in him too, because they had him starting opposite Cam Jordan during OTAs. Now that's all going to shift and continue to move around and stuff like that, but it is an early indicator that they believe Carl Granderson to be one of the top 11 players over on their defensive side. So that's my look at the breakout players. Let me know who you think the breakout players are going to be on offense, on defense, and don't forget to let me know too who you think the most impactful rookie will be in the 2023 New Orleans Saints draft class. I appreciate y'all, as always, for being here for another episode and for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. For all you everydayers out there, we'll be back again tomorrow morning. Whole new episode for you, breaking down a whole bunch of new news around the New Orleans Saints and continuing to keep you up to date with everything you need to know around OTAs. Don't forget to get your questions in as well, because I'll answer those questions in tomorrow's episode, in tomorrow's morning episode, so make sure you get those questions in so I can get those answered for you in the show. I appreciate you, as always, whether it's live or later, you being here and making Locked On Saints a part of your day and a part of your routine. I always appreciate you so much for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi, and if you want to continue the conversation one-on-one from this spot, make sure that you are also checking out joinsubtext.com/lockedonsaints. As always, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.